Good afternoon to all our listeners and viewers of the NDC Heartbeat podcast. We're happy to have all those of you who are listening on radio via WeFM, Vibes FM, Spice Capital Radio, Talk Grenada. We have 100.5 FM out of Grenville and right along out of Brooklyn, New York. And of course, the NDC Heartbeat Facebook page and YouTube. So, be part of the listening audience today. Well, for today's program, what we're going to be doing is sharing with you two presentations which were presented at the last sitting of the Senate. Very interesting indeed. One by Senator the Honorable Claudette Joseph and the other by Senator the Honorable David Andrew. Stay tuned for those.
Through the storm, we have seen the light. Caribou and Petite Martinique will rise. Hearts and hands unite. Together, we stand stronger. Our love for these islands lasts forever.
United Groups of Grenada present We Will Rise Again, the Hurricane Relief Fundraising Family Fun Day, Saturday 7th of September from midday till 8 p.m. at Osterley Sports and Wellbeing Centre, Tentalo Lane, Southall, UB2 4LW. Taking place under the auspices of the Grenada High Commission. All profits and donations will be sent directly to those affected by the devastation of Hurricane Beryl in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. Hashtag We Will Rise Again. So come and help us to help those who need it most at the We Will Rise Again Family Fun Day, featuring entertainment by local Caribbean DJs and special guest artists, plus kids activity zone, bouncy castle, 360 photo booth, food stalls, and more, including a fully licensed bar stocked with good Grenadian rum and Grenadian oil down while stocks last. Not forgetting the big raffle prize draw. Tickets are £10 for adults, £5 for children. Children under 10 go free. Car parking is £5. Tickets from Eventbrite, or you can pay on the gate. More info, call 07498 9111 35 for stall holders. Food stalls are £150, non-food stalls £50. Call 07946 363 948. Help us to help those who need it most at United Groups of Grenada's Hurricane Relief Family Fun Day. We Will Rise Again, Saturday 7th of September at Osterley Sports and Wellbeing Centre, Southall. Remember, it's not what your country can do for you, it's what you can do for your country. Info, call 07973 405 160.
Madam President, I rise to give my full support to the motion before this Honorable House tabled by the Leader of Government Business. Madam President, before you are the estimates, the supplementary estimates for 2024, for which we seek the approval of this Honorable House. Before I commence, Madam President, I make the general point that these estimates are to augment and support the estimates that were approved by the House in December for the year 2024. The first point I would like to make, Madam President, is that this is an annual exercise which is sanctioned by the Public Finance Management Act. It is not a novel exercise. It is not an exercise that is required simply because of the passage of Hurricane Beryl. In every financial year, it is customary for the government to come back to the Parliament around this time and seek the parliamentary approval for additional spending to support the government's work. This year is no exception. It was done last year, and it was done 10 years prior. It happens every year, no matter which administration is holding the seat of government. So, for the benefit of our youthful and inexperienced listeners and viewers, I think that's the first and critical point that should be made. The notion that this supplementary appropriation bill is only before the House because of Hurricane Beryl is inaccurate. It is, in fact, an exercise that happens annually. And why does it happen annually? In order to stay within the confines of the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act, sometimes the allocations requested for certain line items by the various ministries are not fully approved by the technocrats at the Ministry of Finance and ultimately by the Cabinet, because it would take us outside the threshold permissible in the legislation, which now stands, I'm speaking from memory now, I think it's 13% of GDP. That's the first point. So you may budget for a line item in December of 2023, expecting to execute during the course of the year 2024. And at this year, and sometimes even earlier, the amount budgeted is exhausted because you did not get the allocation you requested in the first place. Secondly, the supplementary appropriation bill makes provision for items that were unforeseen. And it need not be a natural disaster. In this case, the most unforeseeable event that has occurred in this year is Hurricane Beryl. But there are instances, unforeseen or on budget items unbudgeted for or unforeseen. For example, under the vote of the Ministry of Climate Resilience, there's a sargassum seaweed, is moss or weed? The sargassum seaweed conference that is to take place in Grenada, which we had to fund, and that wasn't budgeted for in the last budget. Under the Prime Minister's ministry, the CARICOM heads of government meeting was not budgeted for in the 2024 estimates. We had to spend on hosting that event. And of course, the major unforeseen was Hurricane Beryl. So that's point one. Whether it is the now leader of the opposition, who is Prime Minister, or Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell, whoever sits in the seat of government, every single year there is a request for supplementary appropriation. So let's not make politics about something that is so matter of fact that happens. And the law allows for up to 2 supplementary requests in each year. And Madam President, while this supplementary bill caters in the main for the relief, recovery, and the reconstruction efforts in Carriacou, Pidi-Martinique, and the other parts of Grenada affected by Hurricane Beryl, there are other matters that are provided for which align with our current focus as government. So, for instance, Madam President, the last time we were here, we passed the Firearms Amendment Act. And we spoke of government's focus in tackling what appears to be an upsurge in crimes, and in particular, gun-related crimes. And we see that the steps taken by government are not limited only to those relating to legislative reforms such as we did with the Firearms Act. But also, we see, Madam President, that under the Ministry of National Security, for example, there is allocation there for $530,000 for law enforcement, to increase efficiency in fighting crime. So law enforcement equipment, so to enhance the ability of the police to treat with the crimes that we are now increasingly facing. We also see allocation, Madam President, for the reconstruction or renovation of police stations across the island. And there is budgetary allocation there in the Ministry of National Security, sorry, not National Security, Infrastructure. So there is a theme, there is a focus. We are strengthening law enforcement. We are strengthening legislation. We are also engaging in social and community upliftment programs such as Project Stop and Think, all aimed at crime, at fighting crime, Madam President. Madam President, let me say though, as I agree with the other speakers before me, that because of the unexpected, the unprecedented natural disaster that was Hurricane Beryl, by the way, the strongest recorded hurricane in history this early in the season. So Beryl was no ordinary incident. And so naturally, the bulk of the allocations, and you see it going across ministries, is centered on relief, recovery, and reconstruction as a result of Hurricane Beryl. First, Madam President, let me pause for a moment to extend sincerest condolences to the people of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique who suffered any kind of loss as a result of Hurricane Beryl, but more significantly, the loss of human life. And Madam President, the lone fatality from Beryl on the main island, Grenada, occurred at River Road in the constituency of the town of St. George. And we lost a vibrant and well-loved member of the River Road community in the person of Ron Davis. And I here again express sincerest condolences on my own behalf and on behalf of the people, the government and people of Grenada, to all of the victims, but especially to Allison, Ron's wife, and his sisters and his family and neighbors. He indeed was a great loss for the community. Madam President, it seems to me that coming out of Hurricane Beryl, there are some who would like to rewrite history and present alternative facts. Madam President, I think the chance to do that is being taken because a calculation is made that either one, many of us who did experience Hurricane Ivan and its aftermath have forgotten, and then the majority of the others, our youthful population, close to 60%, was simply too young to remember or were not yet born. So, Madam President, I will take a few minutes as a former history teacher to rectify and correct the record. Hurricane Ivan was a Category 3 hurricane that struck Grenada on 7th February 2004. Sorry, 7 September 2004. Yes. 7th, yes, there are some good students here, quick to correct. September 7th, 2004, at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And Madam President, the current leader of the opposition was Prime Minister at the time. He led a government with a 1-seat majority in the Parliament. Honorable Tillman Thomas was the leader of the opposition, having 7 of the seats in the Parliament at the time. And Hurricane Ivan struck just over 1 year after an election. So while most of the members of the opposition in the lower house were new to the Parliament, many on the government side were not new because they had just come from a full majority, a super majority in the lower house, having won the 1999 elections 15-0. When Hurricane Ivan struck, one of the first things, well, initially in the early hours following Hurricane Ivan and up to the following day, we the people did not know where our leader was. We did not know where our leader was, and we learned that our then Governor General, Sir Daniel Williams, apparently also did not know where his Prime Minister was. And he walked from Upper Lucas Street to Redgate. That's where his house is. Wester Hall, St. David's. But I know it was from Lucas Street, my neighborhood, to St. David. Walked, because Government House was utterly destroyed, the official Governor General's residence. We found out later that our Prime Minister was somewhere out there in the sea on a ship seeking refuge, right? A battleship that roves the Caribbean Sea and is ready at short notice when disaster strikes. That's where it turns out our Prime Minister was. Shortly after that, as happened with Beryl, our regional neighbors and friends rallied. So the nation of Trinidad was among the first to come forward. There was a helicopter flying around, and then we learned that the Prime Minister was taken to Trinidad by helicopter ride. Next thing, there were reports that the Prime Minister indicated that members of the opposition was trying to overthrow the government, taking the opportunity of the disaster to overthrow the government. How did that come about, Madam President? It happened because the then opposition, seeing the devastation caused by Hurricane Ivan, called or offered support. And I think in one way expressed it as having a government of national unity. Everybody coming together, opposition and government alike, to rebuild. To that, the then Prime Minister responded, no, 2 man rat can't live in the same hole. So the offer at national unity to reconstruct after Hurricane Ivan was rejected. And then a complaint was made to our neighboring Prime Minister then, Patrick Manning, that those guys, because of course there were some guys in there who had a revolutionary past, the current member for the town of St. George, Mr. Nazim Burke, Mr. George Prime, all of these people were in the opposition. And they were accused of trying to overthrow the government. And they had to go down to Trinidad to meet with Mr. Manning themselves to disabuse of the notion. So that's the background. We know for a fact, Madam President, that up to today, 20 years after Hurricane Ivan, virtually all of the government buildings that were destroyed by the hurricane remain in ruins. York House, Government House, virtually all of the district medical officers' residence, because indeed there was a time when the district medical officers had government residence. So there was one in New Hampshire, I think, St. David, all of them, St. Mark's, all right? So all of the government buildings that were severely damaged or destroyed by Hurricane Ivan remain today. The old barracks on Melville Street, the drill yard, I could go on and on. Because the only government structures that were eventually repaired, and I guess out of necessity, were the schools. And not even all, because I could immediately think of the St. Luke's Primary School in Grenville that was never rebuilt. So that's the legacy we're talking about. Yes, so if you're talking about leadership and legacy, these are the historical facts of what transpired in the aftermath of Hurricane Ivan. In terms of private residences, the majority of those residences were rebuilt by people having their own insurance and through their own efforts. And yes, some of the lower income homes, there was assistance from the government of Guyana. There was some Vincentians and so who came in. Yes, that happened. But there are many homes that were never rebuilt after Hurricane Ivan because the people could not manage and they got no assistance. Take a drive up the Bolio main road and look to your, if you head into Granitang, focus on your left and you will see quite a few of those homes because Bolio was an area that got seriously damaged by Hurricane Ivan. I think there was a fatality or two up there as well. So that's the history, that's the legacy. So yes, my dear colleague, Senator Franklin, we will look, we will learn, and we will take a lesson in what not to do. Contrast, Madam President, with the passage of Hurricane Beryl, a stronger hurricane than Ivan, smaller space in terms of square mileage, yes, but doing arguably much more damage. I went up 2 or 3 days after Beryl, and I think things were worse than they were at Ivan. Madam President, as we speak, almost all the government structures on Carriacou and Petit Martinique are nearing completion for renovation. We are 2 months after the hurricane, Madam President, and reconstruction and recovery is a process and a long one too, not a 2-month process. Not a 2-month process, a long, arduous process. Most of the government structures, the police station, the court, the admin building, most of them, they are already being renovated and some nearing completion. Most of the schools are nearing completion. Madam President, after Hurricane Ivan, schools reopened the following January. So this notion that we should suffer a Category 4 devastating hurricane and reopen school as scheduled is just straight impractical, and those who know, and for those who know better, dishonest. For those who say that we can do it, we can be ambitious, we can try, we can make efforts, but when those efforts do not come to fruition, it is not a point on which the government should be bashed. Because after Hurricane Ivan, it wasn't until January that schools reopened. So, Madam President, I spoke about how our then Prime Minister reacted after Hurricane Ivan. The current Prime Minister, when it was clear that we were going to take a hit, a direct hit, what did he do? He found himself at Central Command, at the NAGMA Central Command, and he stayed there. He stayed there for days and weeks, only briefly. After a while, getting a shower, but in the beginning, he didn't even get a shower. Madam President, he stayed there with the disaster relief workers. He gave us constant updates and briefings. He took charge. He did not go and accuse nobody of trying to overthrow him. Instead, he embraced all assistance offered and immediately brought hope to the people, particularly to the people of Carriacou and Petit Martinique, so that we understand that this too shall pass. Our Prime Minister, and that is admitted. That is admitted by some people who are known to be more supportive of the opposition than the government. Our Prime Minister was a shining light. He stood out and he showed real leadership. And if my colleagues on the other side do not believe me, ask Bishop Devon Rashi. Because there were people such as him commending the Prime Minister for his handling of this disaster. And it is said, you know a good leader, not based on how they lead in times of peace, but how they manage and lead in times of crisis. And for sure, in the Honorable Deacon Mitchell, we are lucky and blessed in Grenada to have him at the helm of leadership in this country. So, when you think of trying to bash and complain, think again, go dig up the old articles online and compare 2004 with 2024. Madam President, in this budget, this supplementary budget, every ministry, almost every ministry, is seeking supplementary support for the relief efforts in Carriacou and Petit Martinique and the northern part of the island of Grenada. That is because, Madam President, all hands are on deck. We are working together to rebuild our country. So, Madam President, the Ministry of National Security, for example, secured 11 vehicles. Because in the days immediately following the hurricane, when we went up to Carriacou, we didn't all go together. We went some at a time. And one of the obvious things there was a lack of sufficient transportation on the island. Almost all the vehicles were damaged by debris, and a lot of them were down. And so a lot of relief was coming in, a lot of stuff to be done, a lot of volunteers, but not enough transportation to move people and items around Carriacou. So 11 vehicles were purchased in short order and sent up to Carriacou. And I think there were a couple others, 3 or so, subsequent. So in all, about 15 or so motor vehicles of different types were sent to Carriacou. And the hundreds of volunteers from the mainland and from Carriacou and from neighboring CARICOM countries and beyond were able to have use of those vehicles to get relief supplies into the nooks and crannies of Carriacou and Petit Martinique. And I saw with my own two eyes, I moved around with him for a little while, the MP for the constituency of Carriacou and Petit Martinique. Kayaks, your real choose. You chose right by Tevin Andrews. Because I moved around with him for a bit, and as we were moving around, and people were stopping, people were indicating, well, we didn't get relief in this village, we didn't get here yet. He was physically going and making sure the areas that were not touched were supplied with relief. He worked hard, hands-on, him and his peers and the support staff. And we must really, really commend and give them an applause as this House would normally do it. Madam President, the Ministry of Economic Development, Agriculture, Planning, they also are in with supporting the relief effort for farmers and fishers. One-off payments. I can't remember the acreage, but it's 5,000 one way and 9,000 the next. I think over 5 acres is $9,000. Yeah. And below is 4,500. And many other initiatives by that particular ministry that would bring relief to our people who have been affected by the hurricane. The Ministry of MIT. Well, again, I think the member for St. George South and the other place deserves a table knock in this House, you know. I think so. Yeah, man. Because the Ministry of MIT has been at the forefront of the recovery and relief effort, particularly the cleaning and clearing of debris. And that ministry, led by the Honorable Minister, has been mobilizing literally hundreds of people every weekend to go up to Carriacou. And, Madam President, the speed with which the bulk of the debris was cleared because of these efforts puts the efforts in 2004 to shame. Because we were in garbage for a long time in 2004. Those of us who remember well, it was the Venezuelans and the Trinidadians, thanks to them, who came and started cleaning, and then we joined, long after. But here we have a leader and a government that could mobilize its own people to lead that effort. And you would see, Madam President, virtually all of the appropriations under the Ministry of MIT is designated to hurricane, burial, recovery, and reconstruction. The Ministry of the Environment is also contributing heavily to the relief and recovery effort. And we see there an appropriation for the Solid Waste Management Authority, and also for cleaning up the marine spaces, because of course we have to get the sunken vessels out of the water before fluids, oils, and so start leaking into the water. And arrangements have been made for that to be done through the ministry, the Environment Ministry, and we see the allocation there in the budget. Madam President, my brother, Minister for Education, will speak for itself, but you will see there, Madam President, allocations for providing relief, again, to the people who have suffered as a result of the hurricane. And also, you will see an appropriation there to take care of our workers at TAMCC, who were not otherwise provided for in the 2024 budget. by way of salary increases commensurate with that which was given to other public workers. So the TAMCC staff are getting their 4% as well. And this has to be provided for in the supplementary budget. Yeah, we are government for workers, and the workers know it. Madam President, Madam President, and I guess the timing was perfect because we were also down-spirited because of the hurricane. Our athletes went to Paris and did us proud. Madam President, our Kirani James, our Lyndon Victor, Anderson Peters, what's Haley's surname again? Tilly Collymore, Zachary Alexander, no, not Alexander, Zachary Alexander is a karate man, Gresham, Zachary Gresham, and I keep forgetting Haley's. The Hazard, Haley Hazard. All of them represented us well, and we are proud of all of them, and we congratulate them. But Madam President, we celebrate with and we congratulate Lyndon Victor, the Caribbean Ironman, and Anderson Peters, who, in relation to whom the Olympic medal was long in coming. We knew that ultimately he would have medaled at the Olympics, and he did it. And so, Madam President, what our athletes had gotten used to was a lot of talk when they do well, and a lot of pronouncement, but no real delivery, no real and proper celebration of them. And we thought, especially in this year of our Golden Jubilee, and with Grenada coming home with 2 medals from 1 Olympics, and topping the globe for the country with the most medals per capita. In addition to which, having one of our very own, with his name written in the books of Olympic history as a record holder, because Lyndon now holds the record for the discus in the decathlon. He has the record now. And then, of course, our javelin thrower stamping his name in Olympic and world athletic history as one of the best of all time. And of course, the undisputed King James, the most celebrated quarter miler in the history of the sport, whether you talk World Championship or Olympic Championship. He is the most celebrated. The only one to have won all of the medals, and at age 31, he ran a faster race. Though he placed 5th, he ran a faster race than he did when he got the gold. So he's getting like fine wine, better with age. So we had so much to be proud of with our athletes that it would really have been remiss of us if we did not celebrate them and bring them home in fine style. And so, Madam President, in the supplementary appropriation here, we see an allocation of $1.2 million for our Olympians in terms of the celebrations and the homecoming ceremonies. But that wasn't all, Madam President. This government, beforehand, we didn't wait for them to do well to celebrate and jump in the front. Beforehand, and quietly behind the scenes, we supported and invested in them in their journey to Paris. Government provided $574,000 thereabout for them to take part. Let me get the exact figure, $573,963 for our athletes to be able to be ready and to compete at the Paris Olympics. And that's what we mean when we say we invest in our youths. We spent money on all of them to get them to Paris and to have them comfortably competing. And by the way, we supported some of the sports administrators as well who traveled to Paris with them. And this is another item provided for in this supplementary budget, which was not catered for in the budget in December when we read it. So, Madam President, with these observations, I wholeheartedly support the bill, and I urge my colleagues on both sides in this honorable House to do the same. Thank you. Madam President, just before I take my seat, to pause to extend on behalf of the government of Grenada heartfelt congratulations to our very recently retired Chief Justice, who has been appointed as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council. And as we all know here, the Privy Council is our highest court. And to have our own Chief Justice appointed to this august institution is really a shining and joyous and proud moment, not just for the Eastern Caribbean, but for all of the Caribbean. So congratulations to Her Ladyship, Dame Janice Pereira. Thank you.
Through the storm, we have seen the light. Caribou and Petite Martinique will rise. Hearts and hands unite. Together, we stand stronger. Our love for these islands lasts forever.
United Groups of Grenada present We Will Rise Again, the Hurricane Relief Fundraising Family Fun Day, Saturday 7th of September from midday till 8 p.m. at Osterley Sports and Wellbeing Centre, Tentelo Lane, Southall, UB2 4LW. Taking place under the auspices of the Grenada High Commission. All profits and donations will be sent directly to those affected by the devastation of Hurricane Beryl in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. Hashtag We Will Rise Again. So come and help us to help those who need it most at the We Will Rise Again Family Fun Day, featuring entertainment by local Caribbean DJs and special guest artists, plus kids activity zone, bouncy castle, 360 photo booth, food stalls, and more, including a fully licensed bar stocked with good Grenadian rum and Grenadian oil down while stocks last. Not forgetting the big raffle prize draw. Tickets are £10 for adults, £5 for children. Children under 10 go free. Car parking is £5. Tickets from Eventbrite, or you can pay on the gate. More info, call 07498 9111 35 for stall holders. Food stalls are £150, non-food stalls £50. Call 07946 363 948. Help us to help those who need it most at United Groups of Grenada's Hurricane Relief Family Fun Day. We Will Rise Again, Saturday 7th of September at Osterley Sports and Wellbeing Centre, Southall. Remember, it's not what your country can do for you, it's what you can do for your country. Info, call 07973 405 160.
I rise to support the supplementary appropriation as presented by the Leader of Government Business, and further to commend the government and its finance team for what I will term as a very responsive supplementary budget. All sectors have been appropriately touched or budgeted for, allocated for, and stimulus provided for. Our farmers and fisher folk, there's provision for them, notwithstanding the questions about the need for detail, we acknowledge, but that's been provided for. There has been provision for housing, there has been provision for social sector, for education, for infrastructure. Our athletes, and even before I say the athletes, I was happy to hear in particular that the Monsignor Bridge, the Marquis Bridge, is being considered as well. It's a very important bridge in the network of roads across the Eastern District, and we've been making lots of clamor about it. And so to see it being considered, whether it's for conceptual designs or initial works, I'm happy to see that happen. For housing and our athletes being featured for rewards and for celebration, all of these things were catered for in this supplementary appropriation. And I think it's very well placed. But before I go on, Madam President, to talk a little bit and give some explanations as to the need for the appropriation in relation to Vote 40, the Ministry of Education, where it says Youth, Sports and Culture as well. I just want to talk about, rebut a few things, talk about a few statements that were made on the other side, that I think serve probably as good political statements, good politicking, but serve to really and truly mislead the people. I'm not quite happy about that. So, Madam President, I start with one of the statements made by Leader of Opposition Business, Senator Cox, when he pointed out and lamented that this supplementary budget, although some persons talked about it being driven by Beryl, only had about 30% from his calculations of it towards Carriacou and Petit Martinique. Madam President, my calculation tells me that using his calculation, that reflects approximately $81 million of the appropriation to be spent between now and December. He later acknowledged, and we all do acknowledge, that any recovery process is not a 3-month or 4-month period. It's an ongoing process. So if, we can talk about population differences and sizes. We can compare the population in St. Patrick and the northern part of the country compared to population in Carriacou. We can talk about a number of different things that we can compare. But let those go. Just saying, we're talking about $81 million, that reflects that 30%, and to be spent in that period of time to the end of the year, and this process is ongoing. So a lot more would be spent, and the impression must not be conveyed that this is the sum total of what's going to be allocated towards the recovery effort in Carriacou and Petit Martinique. I want to move to the second idea. Quite a bit was said about the Molinier Road project and the fact that there is a request for an appropriation of $12 million when the original project was $9 million and that now it's $21 million. Well, I could appreciate that it is significant enough when a project cost $9 million initially, and now you're hearing a few years later that you need $12 million to complete the project. But there are reasonable explanations that were given prior about the need to excavate, the need to redo the designs. So it's not a case where there are no explanations given. Contrary to what it might be sounding as if it's just woeful misappropriation and careless calculations. That's not the issue. And it must not be conveyed from this honorable house to try or to attempt to confuse or mislead our listening population. Further, Madam President, what concerned me even more was that they linked those sums and the 21 million then calculated and pointed it to a lack of leadership. Senator Cox belabored that it pointed to leadership and the lack of leadership. Well, and if that was what was said, I quickly remember a decade plus ago when we had, when we had over $18 million that was drawn down, and Grenadians have nothing to show for it under the former administration, nothing to show for it. $18 million is approximately 48.6 million EC dollars, thereabout. We're talking about Mount Hartman. We're talking about, and we can cite other projects where millions of dollars were used, were guaranteed, were drawn down on, were spent, and Grenadians have nothing to show for it. Now, and we're comparing that with an important piece of road infrastructure that we have reason, we have explanations as to why it needed to have the cost increased, change in design, the slippage that wasn't anticipated. All of these things were brought to the Honorable House. And yet you compare that to lack of leadership. So I wonder, when 18 million US dollars going up in smoke with nothing to show for it, what do you say of the leadership that you subscribe to? And we can call out the other things there. I move along, Madam President. And there's a statement that was made, again, by the leader of opposition business, that the representative for Carriacou and Petit Martinique Affairs indicated that everybody would get support, and he was looking to see everybody get support, and not everybody is getting support. Again, that is misleading. Because the truth and in fact is, there are provisions that benefit every person, Madam President, across the tri-island state. The free barrel, everybody benefits once they apply. For housing, there are tax relief measures on all rebuilding material. The VAT is relieved. Anything that is being imported on a personal scale for your own recovery, as declared, is exempt from tax. So all of these measures are open to Tutmon Bagay. Everybody stands to benefit. So give the impression that because the MP made statements that he made, that not everybody was benefiting and it was reflecting deception on the part of government is a suggestion that I refute and refuse to accept in this Honorable House. I will not go to the next step. I will save the withdrawal for another time. Be better than that, brother. All right. So, Madam President, I refer to another misinterpretation. I happened to be on a visit to Petit Martinique with the Prime Minister a couple of days after the passage of Hurricane Beryl. And I walked in rain with the Prime Minister to some of the households. And we went into some of the homes of some of the same elderlies. So I heard being talked about that the elderlies, no elderlies in Petit Martinique, and the seniors are gone. But when we got there, the option was put to those people while we walked in their premise, if they would want to be transferred and moved to Grenada for safekeeping. So those who have come, they have come at all costs. Yes, you see it reflected in the expenses here. But it was their choice. They were willing. They wanted it. And life comes before things. People first, things after. So to suggest that there was something problematic about having moved them is to fail to recognize that we have moved to preserve the interest and life and well-being of our citizens of Petit Martinique. Madam President, a suggestion was made for the disaster management plan, and I think Senator Douglas referred, where is the plan? There's a need for the national disaster plan. Some calls were made for that. I want to point out, we had just gone past 2 years in office. The NADMA we met, we want to commend the officers who are significantly voluntary workers. So we meet at NADMA that we talk about, that supposed to have been in existence for all the years prior to our getting into office. That is primarily resourced through voluntarism, without adequate resourcing, supposed to have come through Ivan and all of these other natural disasters that members of the other side claim they have learned so much from. And now that we have a disaster 20 years later, we still don't have a structure a seriously resourced structure to treat with those resources. Where's the storeroom? What were the warehouse facilities and the stockpile of material? When the hurricane came, I personally went across St. Andrew Southeast. And there was literally no supplies. We hadn't experienced that before. It's our first experience. But the other side says, we've been there, call us, we've done that before. We've been there, we've done that. But what have you left for us with all the experience you've been there with? I have a problem with that. But I guarantee you, the NADMA we met is not going to be the NADMA we leave. We are going to enhance it, strengthen it, and make it better to treat with disasters. It is for that reason I commend the Prime Minister for his judgment in speedily responding to acquire vehicles to strengthen the capacity of NADMA to respond in such times. Madam President, I want to speak of one issue here. I think it was raised by Senator Nealon Franklin when he drew attention to page 27 in the midterm report, and he referenced table 5, the central government's estimated 2024 fiscal performance. And he asked a very pertinent question, but I think the question, if not carefully understood, could mislead. You see, this table says estimated 2024 fiscal performance. So the question was asked, if total revenue and grants was 1.404.1 million, and the budget was 1.321.4 million, and there's a variance of 82.7 million. In other words, there seems to be a surplus, according to, in his paraphrasing, there was a surplus there. Why then are we asking for a supplemental of 2.69 million and not this amount less, this 82.7 million less? That was the question. 269 million. Yeah. And the answer is simply, these figures reflect the projection, the estimated projection for all of 2024. We have not gone to all of 2024 yet. And at the time when that's the midterm review. So it doesn't say that if monies are in hand. It doesn't say, it says if we continue the way we are going, this is what it's likely to be. Further, let me read the end, Madam President, of that very line. The end of page 27. It says, based on actual outruns up to June and other assumptions, Grenada's fiscal performance for the full year 2024 shows a notable divergence from the budgeted expectation in table 5. It says total revenue and grants are estimated at 1.404.1 million, which is 6.3% higher, which is the 82.7 million, than the budgeted amount of 1.321.4 million. This increase is primarily due to higher than expected collections in non-tax revenue, particularly in the immigration migration industry revenue, which exceeded the budgeted by a significant margin of 42%. Right? I just wanted to point that out. So it's not actual figure, it's projected. It's not reflective of a savings because it's just a estimated figure. The final thing I want to talk about before I talk about education, Madam President, is quite a bit of talk was made about education. And school, concern about reopening school and when school would reopen. Of course, in my early interactions, we aimed to reopen as soon as possible, and the soonest possible was the 2nd of September. But even when those discussions were had in consultation with stakeholders on CARICO and PT Martinique, we made it clear that we are aiming, that we're fully cognizant that it might not be possible, but we learned since we were in kindergarten. Aim for the sky. In case you miss, you fall on a cloud. In case you aim for a cloud and you fall and you miss, you fall on a treetop. But if you aim for a low branch and you fall on the ground. So I don't think there's anything wrong, Madam President and Honorable House, in having projected and aimed for the reopening of school to be September. It may not have been practical, but it's something to work towards. It gave a sense of urgency to treat with matters, to process things, to do stuff. And even now, we are realistic enough that before the reopening of school, we can come to the nation and say there is going to be a delay. We still didn't say how long the delay was going to be. We say in the first instance, 2 weeks. But we are going to look, we are going to monitor the recovery process and the reinstallation of all of the utilities necessary to function, and we'll advise accordingly. And in my mind, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We'll continue to do that. We are in continuous collaboration with education officials on Carriacou, with our main department, and I'm quite confident. We are working with the contractors. In fact, some work has started on some of the main schools, Hillsborough, Bishops. Some have not started as quickly as we wanted them to, for all the estimates and all that, and some of those things keep delays, create delays that we wanted to avoid, but there are always options that we are exploring. And we are going to start school much sooner than it took on the Ivan. I can tell you that. So to create the impression that we're in some kind of crisis and we should have called and throw up our hand and say, well, help us here, we lose, we weigh. That is nothing near to the truth. Why is there a need to carry on historical as if we've lost sight of something in education in relation to the opening of school in Carriacou? I don't see it. I don't understand it. And as minister, I feel quite comfortable that we're heading in a soundly footed direction. Madam President, I move quickly to talk about the appropriation under Vote 40, and simply because it did include youth and sports, although it was spoken about, I want to pause and commend the performances of our Olympians in the Paris 2024 Olympics. They have done us proud. And we can't commend them enough. And so any amount of spending that this appropriation begs in support of those athletes, although some of it is already spent, and to reward them can be enough. Yes. Absolutely sure. Absolutely. Well, that's why we're making it known publicly, and that's why we know that some people who have promised things before came to us and said they never got it. But we are going to deliver, and the Honorable Senator, leader of opposition business on the other side, was quite correct. We have grown accustomed to the phrase, as is representative of our operation, promise made, promise kept. And he's catching on to it too, so that's good. So that's good. Madam President, I want to talk briefly, in the supplementary, there is a request for close to, I think, just over $500,000 for TAMCC, and that's in keeping with the government's approval of increases for TAMCC staff. At the time, of course, that wasn't budgeted. We've since paid out some, but we learned that there was a calculation shortage that we've had to treat with. And so that is now being reflected here. But we are committed to taking care of our workers. We are committed. We said we were going to do it. And despite the shortfall based on calculation, we are going to do it. And hence, it is in this appropriation, because we are committed as a government to treating labor, to treating our workers fairly, rightly, and giving them what we believe we have agreed with them to get. And so we do that. Then, Madam President, there is in that Vote 40 appropriation as increase in subvention from $75,000 to $100,000 for NULO, the New Life Organization. Now, NULO, as we know, is one of our leading skills institutions. Since the announcement of the free tuition policy and government support there, they have more than doubled their intake. That's required, yes. They have more than doubled their intake, and that speaks to success in getting more students enrolled in necessary skills. And that puts a demand on them for more teachers, for more instructors, and in some cases probably for different kinds of facilities and resources. And so we are happy as a government to respond to that kind of challenge. That's a challenge of growth. That's a challenge of expansion. And so we are happy to support that, and that is reflected in this appropriation, and I'm happy to see that there. Then, Madam President, in Vote 40 appropriation, there is a $1,500,000 support for the construction of a new school for the St. George's SDA Primary. Now, here is a religious organization. This organization came to the government and said, please, we've been raising funds. We have the majority of the money to build a new school. The facilities we have, they're inadequate. We have an excellent school, and most people will be aware of that. Yeah. We want to build a new facility. We'll be happy if you help us. We are asking you to help us with this shortfall. They raise funds, they have sponsors, and they came to us, met with us, and we felt we have no choice but to help an institution like that they're trying to help themselves as a faith-based organization, and we felt we could meet that gap. And that is that figure that is being reflected here. Of course, that wasn't in the budget when we passed the budget last year. Madam President, I move to the special support package for students of Carriacou and Petit Martinique attending TAMCC and NULO on the mainland. Now, we did have some engagement with students and education officials in Carriacou, and I think many of them felt many of the education officials in particular felt they were not willing to come to the mainland to do TAMCC. So we brainstormed about a blended approach. We brainstormed about using a room in one of the schools to do lectures. But when we look at it carefully, we still realize there are some serious limitations. One of the utility companies remain completely down still. And if you're going to do a blended approach where lectures are streamed from the main campus, that's going to be challenging if the Wi-Fi systems are not all up. And so we've decided, in fact, several parents have privately messaged different ones of us asking what support can be had for persons who are interested to come to the main campus of TAMCC on the mainland. And so the government has put together a one-year support package for students from Carriacou and Petit Martinique. I'm sure you're happy to hear that. A one-year support package for students from Carriacou and Petit Martinique who want to come to TAMCC or NULO on the mainland. That package will include accommodation, transportation, and some food allowance. Right? Somebody's asking, what about existing? I'm waiting on the data to tell us, but for now, we're talking about students who want to come to TAMCC. We don't want the educational journey to be disrupted. I mean, most people who started already, probably had a plan, although this plan could be affected. So we prepared to look at it, look at the numbers, and respond appropriately. But this package is available. We've done our initial work, and it tells us there are about 30 plus, close to 40 persons who were pursuing or prepared to pursue TAMCC studies at the campus in Carriacou. How many of them are prepared to come to the mainland? We don't know just yet. We are still working with education officials there to fine-tune those, But out of that pool, this package of support is available for 1 year. Additionally, for the persons in Carriacou and Petit Martinique who were accepted or who are being accepted into universities, the University of the West Indies campuses, or even SGU, this semester, we want to offer a similar 1 year support package. You see, Madam President, we understand how important education is as a government. And we know that the people of Carriacou and Petit Martinique have suffered in many ways more immensely than most of the rest of us on the island in terms of the passage of Hurricane Beryl. And we don't want to confine our students who are interested in upgrading themselves to staying home and not being able to continue their educational journey. And it is for that reason that those students too, we know we have at least 4 already based on numbers coming to us. It probably can be, when we consider those who may be there already, it can be another 4 maybe. We don't know the final figures yet, but we don't anticipate it's going to be outrageous. We are offering that 1 year support package of support where we pay the rest of the fees that they would have had to pay. Be it at SGU, we pay the additional 10% and support them, so that the parents, the father who probably was a fisherman and his boat is out of commission, probably no longer has to stress and wonder if he has to take his child away from St. George's University, or if he has to foil that plan to send his child to Cave Hill or Mona. And so we have that plan, Madam President, and having said those things, these are the critical elements that inform the almost $10 million appropriation request on the Vote 40, Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports. And so having said that, Madam President, I commend this appropriation budget to this House. I offer my full support, and I covet the support of all of my other colleagues on this side and the other side. Thank you very much. I didn't do too bad, please.
Thank you for joining the Heartbeat today, and do join us again next Sunday when we'll endeavor to bring you equally interesting episodes. To the students who are returning to school this semester, we want to wish you all the very best. Take every opportunity you can in your learning upliftments. To the teachers, the parents, the guardians, we encourage you to keep courage, keep strong, and continue providing all the necessary assistance you can for the next generation. Good luck and God bless.